In the summer of 1895, on a quiet hill outside Bologna, a young man stood beside a strange collection of wires, metal rods, batteries, and instruments. There was no telephone line connecting him to another room. There was no cable buried underground. He was trying to send a message through the air. His name was Guglielmo Marconi. Most people around him had no reason to believe that his experiment would work. Sending a signal without a wire sounded like a dream. But Marconi had spent years thinking about one simple question. What if a message could travel without a cable? He did not know how far that idea would take him. He only knew he wanted to try. Marconi was born in 1874 near Bologna, Italy. His father, Giuseppe Marconi, was a wealthy landowner. His mother, Annie Jameson, came from an Irish family connected to the Jameson whiskey business. Marconi grew up between different worlds. He spent time in Italy and Britain. He learned languages and developed a strong interest in science. But he was not a typical student. He was fascinated by electricity. In the late 19th century, electricity was changing the world. Telegraph lines already connected cities and countries. Messages could travel long distances, but they needed wires. Alexander Graham Bell had shown that the human voice could travel through wires. Thomas Edison and others were developing electrical technologies that seemed almost magical. And scientists were beginning to understand that electricity could create waves that traveled through space. One of the most important discoveries came from the German physicist Heinrich Hertz. Hertz had shown experimentally that electromagnetic waves could be produced and detected. His work confirmed ideas that had been predicted by James Clerk Maxwell. Marconi became fascinated by these experiments. He began asking a practical question. If electromagnetic waves could travel through the air, could they carry information? Scientists had already studied the waves. Marconi wanted to use them. That difference would define his work. While still a young man, he began experimenting at his family's home. He built simple equipment from available materials. His early apparatus was not beautiful. It included batteries, spark gaps, wires, metal plates, and a device for detecting signals. He placed a transmitter in one location and a receiver some distance away. Then he sent electrical pulses. At first, the distance was small. But the signal traveled. That was enough to make Marconi keep going. He moved the equipment farther apart. The experiments became more ambitious. He discovered that raising the transmitting antenna and connecting it to the ground could greatly improve the range of the signal. This was one of the practical steps that helped turn laboratory experiments into a working communication system. But Marconi faced a problem. He was a young man without a university position or a large scientific institution behind him. His work was not yet widely accepted. So he turned to Britain. In 1896, Marconi traveled to England. There, he found people willing to take his experiments seriously. He demonstrated his wireless system to officials and engineers. The results attracted attention. The British government saw a possible military and naval use. Ships could potentially communicate without depending on cables. That idea mattered. At sea, a wire was impossible. A ship could not simply connect itself to a telegraph cable while moving across the ocean. Wireless communication could change that. Marconi continued improving his equipment. The signals traveled farther. The apparatus became more reliable. In 1897, he formed a company to develop and commercialize wireless communication. This was an important turning point. Marconi was no longer just experimenting in a private workshop. He was building a system. He needed engineers. He needed investors. He needed customers. And he needed people to believe that wireless communication had a future. The technology soon attracted the attention of shipping companies. For sailors, the possibilities were clear. A ship equipped with wireless equipment could communicate with another ship or a station on land. For the first time, a vessel far from shore could have a connection to the outside world without a physical cable. But Marconi wanted more. He wanted to prove that wireless signals could travel enormous distances. The Atlantic Ocean stood in front of him. Across that ocean were Europe and North America. Thousands of kilometers separated the two. Many people doubted that a wireless signal could cross such a distance. Marconi decided to try. In 1901, he traveled to Newfoundland. His receiving station was set up at Signal Hill near St. John's. The equipment was simple compared with modern communication systems. A large kite carried a wire into the air. The receiver waited. Across the Atlantic, Marconi's transmitting station in Cornwall was sending signals. The message was simple. 3 dots. The letter S in Morse code. Marconi listened. The equipment was surrounded by uncertainty. The signal was faint. It was not a clear voice. It was not a modern radio broadcast. It was a series of tiny electrical impulses. But Marconi believed he heard the expected pattern. 3 dots. If his interpretation was correct, the signal had crossed the Atlantic. The experiment became famous. The world began to pay attention. Marconi had not invented every part of wireless communication. Many scientists and inventors had contributed important discoveries before him. But Marconi had done something important. He had taken scientific principles and turned them into a practical communication system. He understood that invention was not only about discovering a new idea. It was also about making the idea useful. That became the foundation of his career. Wireless stations appeared along coastlines. Ships began carrying wireless equipment. Operators sat at their instruments and listened for messages. The air itself had become a communication path. And then came one of the most dramatic tests of the technology. In 1909, the passenger ship RMS Republic collided with another vessel in the Atlantic. The Republic was badly damaged. Its wireless operator sent a distress message. Other ships received it. Help arrived. The wireless system had helped save lives. The incident showed people that the technology was not just an interesting experiment. It could matter in an emergency. But the most famous maritime test came a few years later. In April 1912, the Titanic struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic. The ship carried wireless equipment. Its operators sent distress signals. Nearby ships received them. The rescue effort that followed became one of the most important moments in the history of wireless communication. The Titanic disaster also changed public understanding of radio communication. People realized that a ship could send a message even when it was far from land. The technology had become part of maritime safety. Marconi's company and wireless operators had played a major role in making that possible. But Marconi's story was not simply a story of success. His work also became part of scientific and legal disputes. Marconi received credit for developing a practical wireless telegraph system, but he was not working alone in a world without other inventors. Scientists and engineers such as Nikola Tesla, Oliver Lodge, Eduard Branly, Alexander Popov, Jagadish Chandra Bose, and others contributed important work to the development of radio and wire. There were also patent disputes. Marconi's company defended its inventions aggressively. In 1943, after Marconi's death, the United States Supreme Court invalidated some of his patent claims, citing earlier work, including patents associated with Nikola. So the simple story that one man invented radio completely by himself is not accurate. The real history is more complicated. Marconi was one of several people building on a growing body of scientific knowledge. His great achievement was combining ideas, experiments, engineering, and business into a system that could be used in the real world. That was his strength. He kept asking how far the signal could travel, and then he tried to make it go farther. As wireless technology developed, Marconi became increasingly. He received honors around the world. In 1909, he shared the Nobel Prize in Physics with Karl Ferdinand Braun for their contributions to the development of wireless telegraphy. Marconi was still young, but the technology he had helped develop was already spreading. Radio stations appeared. Ships communicated with land. Military forces used wireless signals. News could travel faster. And eventually, wireless communication moved beyond Morse code. Voice transmission became possible. Then came radio broadcasting. Families could sit in their homes and listen to voices and music coming from stations many kilometers away. The invisible waves that Marconi had once struggled to send across a field were becoming part of everyday life. But there was another side to Marconi. He was not only interested in communication. He was interested in distance. He wanted to understand how far wireless signals could travel and how the Earth's atmosphere affected them. His experiments helped encourage further research into long-distance radio. As scientists learned more about the ionosphere and radio propagation, they began to understand why some signals could travel much farther than expected. Marconi's work helped push these questions forward. He also became involved in politics and public life in Italy. As he grew older, he became connected with the fascist government of Benito Mussolini and was appointed to important public positions. This part of his life remains controversial and should not be ignored. Marconi was a brilliant engineer, but he was also a man living through a complicated political period. History rarely gives us perfectly simple heroes. His personal choices were part of the same life as his scientific achievements. Marconi died in Rome in 1937. When news of his death spread, radio stations around the world paid tribute to him. For 2 minutes, radio transmissions were suspended in his honor in many places. The silence was symbolic. The man who had helped make wireless communication practical was being remembered through the very technology he had helped develop. But the story did not end there. In the decades after Marconi's death, wireless communication continued to grow. Radio became a major source of news and entertainment. Television followed. Radar became important during the Second World War. Satellites carried signals around the planet. Mobile phones allowed people to communicate while moving through cities. Wi-Fi connected computers without cables. Bluetooth connected small devices across short distances. Modern wireless networks can send enormous amounts of information through the air in seconds. The technology is far more advanced than anything Marconi could have imagined. Yet the basic idea feels familiar. A signal leaves one place. It travels through space. Another device receives it. The message has crossed a distance without a physical wire connecting the 2 points. That was the problem Marconi wanted to solve. And he began with very simple equipment. A young man. A small workshop. A few electrical components. A hill. A signal. And a question. Could information travel through the air? His answer changed communication. But perhaps the most interesting part of Marconi's story is not the famous Atlantic experiment. It is what happened before it. He had no guarantee that his idea would work. He did not know how far the signal would travel. He did not know whether people would pay for the technology. He did not know whether the scientific community would accept all of his claims. He kept testing. When something failed, he changed the equipment. When the signal was weak, he looked for ways to strengthen it. When the distance increased, he built another station. That is how his work moved forward. Not through one perfect experiment, but through hundreds of small improvements. The history of radio is also a reminder that major inventions rarely belong to only one person. Marconi stood on the work of scientists who had studied electricity and electromagnetic waves before him. He borrowed ideas. He tested them. He combined them. He improved them. And he built a practical system that could be used by ordinary people, ships, governments, and businesses. That is why his place in history remains important. He helped turn invisible waves into a practical tool for human communication. Today, we live surrounded by wireless signals. Our phones send messages through the air. Satellites send information across continents. Cars connect to networks. Headphones receive music without wires. Computers communicate without cables. Most of us never stop to think about it. The process feels normal. But once, it seemed almost impossible. Imagine standing on a field in the 1890s. There is no cable between you and the person standing far away. You send a signal. And somewhere beyond your view, another instrument responds. You cannot see the message. You cannot hear it. You cannot touch it. But it is there. That invisible connection was the world Marconi helped bring closer. And perhaps that is the most lasting lesson from his life. Sometimes the biggest changes begin with something we cannot see. A thought. A wave. A signal. A simple experiment. And one person willing to ask a question that other people have not yet answered. Marconi looked at the discoveries of his time and imagined something practical. He imagined communication without wires. Then he spent years trying to prove that it could be done. The world listened. And once the first signals crossed the distance, there was no going back. The age of wireless communication had begun.